I'm Tom Gray, I'm Director of Digital Catapult Northern Ireland, and I'm the non-AI domain expert on the floor today. So we've got three really excellent individuals, each with their own particular experience and skills in the AI field. So just like to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get stuck into the meat of the discussion. So from my far left, we've got Nell Watson.
Hello, I'm Nell. I'm an engineer, entrepreneur, educator, and sometimes tech philosopher. I'm very fascinated by the field of machine ethics in particular, and new and esoteric forms of machine intelligence.
Hello, nice to be here. This is Manoj Kumar. I'm a business architect in data and AI CTO office within Microsoft Services. I'm based out of Boston. So in my role, we work with me and my team, we work with customers identifying business values of the AI scenarios that they want to light up. And also we try to connect that to their strategy so that the business value that we identify is realized. My experience also comes from some of the work streams that I'm involved in within Microsoft. That's in AI ethics, AI transparency, and business value realization work streams. Thank you.
My name is Rory Hanratty. I am the Deputy CTO for Kainos Digital. What we mostly do is try to build better software for humans, pretty much. I think that's the best way that I can put it. We're very keen on putting users at the center of how software is built and designed, and how we can use new technology to make people's lives easier. A lot of what we do is help the UK government transform how citizens interact with government. Government's a funny thing, it's inflicted on people. It's not a choice that you make. So if you have to tax your car, you have to renew your passport and stuff like that. In an old world, previously users were secondary to the experience of having IT systems. That's flipped around significantly in the last couple of years with a focus on the user first. So from an AI point of view, my interest in that is how can we use that as a tool to improve people's lives? How can we deliver better experiences for people who have to interact with technology? And ultimately, how can we as basically a society understand ourselves better? So that's kind of my take on that. And how can we apply these technologies in new and interesting ways?
Okay, so a great intros, and delighted to be joined by, I guess, three such illustrious individuals. Can we just take maybe a few minutes to talk a little bit about what we understand by AI? Now, we've got a very tech-savvy audience, but they may not be domain experts, so I guess it'd be good to understand each of our perspectives on what AI is. So Nell, what do you think?
Well, AI is any system which replicates on some level activities whereby human beings make decisions about things. And there are many different aspects of it. Sort of the older forms of AI, sometimes described as narrow AI, which were often hand-coded, where you would explicitly create like a decision tree, that sort of thing. In the past 5 years or so, there's been a very significant development in deep neural networks, which is a much more intuitive and creative way of reaching understanding about things. And it's this latest form of machine intelligence which is really enabling machines to replicate in many ways the things that the human mind can do in 1 second or less, such as transcribing between text or speech, or making an aesthetic impression of something, or generating something creatively, or transferring the style of one thing onto another. So it's a very, very exciting time within the space of machine intelligence, and I can't wait to see what's coming around the corner.
So from my perspective, AI is not a new concept. I mean, it has been there for a long time. The reason Nell was also mentioning, the reason why it is more prevalent in this era or this last 5 years is because of a few things. You have lots and lots and lots of data coming in, right? I mean, there are in the last 5 years, if you see the entire data sets that have come in, that is equal to or greater than the entire data corpus that we have accumulated for the last 100 years, right? And the second thing is the computing power of cloud put together. And if you see the latest GPUs and all these series of hardwares coming in and then all consolidated in the cloud. And I remember like 5 years ago when I was managing an implementation of an end-to-end BI, it used to take us about 2 weeks to churn about 100 gig of data. Now it's like hours or minutes, or if not seconds, hours or minutes. We are able to come up with the responses, and we are able to generate intelligent insights. And that's where real-time analytics and things are coming in, right? And that's the reason why the AI is right now very prevalent, and it's going to amplify. It's going to amplify, and AI is not the term of future. AI is now. The only thing that distinguishes us from what we make sure that we do it now versus later would be how we can take people along, and that's something that we're going to talk about in future maybe. But that's one thing, and the third one is the way the models are being generated, models are being developed. It was not that we were not developing models earlier, but then with the deep neural networks and all the different kinds of models that are coming up, that is the third angle of it, because of which AI is more prevalent.
So for me, I guess there's two different ways that you can look at what AI is or artificial intelligence is. On the one hand, it is the kind of the different models and different approaches that you can take to have a machine try to understand things better, or maybe reveal different things to you about how the world works and so on. I think for me, what I would like it to be, or where I would like to see this end up, is basically as almost like an augmentation to us again as humans, to further our understanding of how the world works and maybe reveal something about ourselves that we didn't quite know. So for example, one of the techniques that was used by NASA to discover a new planet was to build a neural network that could sift through volumes of data that was impossible for humans to understand, and spot insights that would take teams and teams of people, possibly decades, to try and find out. And that can be reduced to work that can happen over the course of maybe, like you said, hours, minutes, maybe weeks to process that volume of data. But that reveals something about the universe that we didn't previously know. And that's the most exciting thing about what's happening right now in the field of AI and the sort of applications that you can make. And Manoj made a great point about the increase and the proliferation of kind of cloud technologies and stuff. It's democratized the tooling and the things that you need to use to kind of achieve these sort of results. There are things that companies have made open source that makes them free to basically everybody in this room to use, to build their own versions of this and experiment with these things. And like that for me is a super exciting aspect to this.
That's great. So last stock question before we get maybe a bit interesting. Sorry, not that you haven't been interesting today. Can you give me an example of, I guess, projects or activities that your organization's been involved in that helps illustrate what's the state of the art today? And maybe we'll start with Rory this time.
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned before, a lot of the work that we do is with services for citizens and central government. And I think state of the art's a good question. Like, what's state of the art for maybe somebody who is like thinking way further out in the future, like Nell is going to be like, that's black magic type stuff for some of the people that we work with. So state of the art for some of the people that we work with is being able to leverage data that they have to gain insight on something that they previously wouldn't been able to do. And I think that's one of the interesting things about AI as well, is trying to take people on a journey to understand the potential of this kind of stuff. So I guess an example that I can give is that we worked with one of the agencies in the UK who look after testing your car, right? So to make sure vehicles are safe, they are tested in the garage and they make sure that the brakes are working, the lights are working, all that kind of stuff. Previously, they weren't really able to understand whether or not those tests would be done properly because there's too much data, it's spread out all over the place, they couldn't really capture it properly. And the first stepping stone to actually doing useful insight on that was to rebuild those services because they weren't designed to make the data available. But once they'd done that, and we helped them get to that point, what we were able to do was to kind of join together very, very different interesting data sets, like the actual results of tests, plus the speed that somebody went through the user journey using the software application and other bits of telemetry that you wouldn't have really considered before. And in building something like that, we're able to build a machine learning model that detects fraud almost instantly. Like it's close to instant, that it can go, that garage is definitely cheating at tests, and that's making the road less safe for people, right? And because that's the point of it. So I think that's a good simple example of how you can do a small thing to have a huge impact. And when you multiply that, out to things like, I think, Manoj, you can probably talk about the kind of genome side of things and some of those kind of aspects. Like, it's a huge amplifier to all sorts of things. It unlocks a huge amount of value for people. It's an accelerator for human intelligence, basically.
Thank you. Manoj?
Yeah, so I would like to talk about genomics. I mean, we were talking about this for some time. 2 years ago, I got into an engagement with largest pediatric cancer research hospital, and we were talking about how can petabytes of data be democratized for others to do research on. So that's where our work started. And to give a bit of a background in terms of genomics, if you see, sequencing technologies have evolved in the last 20 years, right? 25 years. When you see a human whole genome sequence, that is sequencing the entire body of converting DNA to digital data of about 3 billion base pairs, it would give you everything you know about what is the color of your eyes, what's the color of your hair, what kind of genetic disorder you might have, and things like that. 20 years ago, the sequencing itself was like, for sequencing one whole genome sequence, the cost of it was about $100 million. And now in the last 20 years, it has become like, currently it is less than $1,000, and in a few years it's going to be $100. What that means for people is everybody in the world, they can have a sequence, they can have their whole genome sequence done as part of their treatment itself. What that happens is, for example, if I take a breast cancer case, it takes 10 years for the breast cancer to develop, and the last 2 years is fatal. But with whole genome sequencing done, the first 2 years, you are able to identify where the cancer is, what kind of cancer it is, and then you're able to fix that problem before it even arrives, and which is helpful for humanity, right? Now, in this case, in the pediatric cancer case itself, if you see the history of that customer, when they started with a particular kind of pediatric cancer research 50, 60 years ago, the mortality rate was 90%. 90% of kids died because of certain kind of pediatric cancer. And now when they see, because of all that researches that they have done and because of all the technology that has improved, 4 out of 5 kids are saved at this point. That's a huge impact. That's a huge impact for humanity, right? And what they are doing at this point is, guys, we have petabytes of data. We don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to make sure that it is democratized. We want to give it to other researchers so that something that we might not have found could be found with your research. And that's a real game changer in terms of healthcare, right? So that's what it is enabling because of the cloud technologies, because of the huge data that is available at this point. And on top of that, what we are also doing is we are making sure that their secondary analysis is not very complex enough so that the bioinformaticians who are in that research centers, they can do tertiary analysis, the kind of real research that they have to do that is not in the data part, not in the churning of the data part. The real analysis they have to do is after that they have done all these primary analysis that has been done. So that has been, which means that they are able to save so much time between the data generation to the data that is really could be acceptable for researchers to do real research on. So that's a real thing.
Thanks, Manoj. So from the perspective of a tech philosopher, what do you see as state of the art?
What's state of the art? Wow. Let's see. Back around 2011 or so, I set up a machine vision company which had the mission of basically making it very easy to capture a 3D model of your body from 2 photos. And I put a team together, raised a bunch of money, and we had, PhDs working on these sort of hand-trained models, and if you sort of amended one thing and you could find shoulders easily, it would break finding feet and that kind of thing. And it was a real nightmare. And then around 2011 there was this renaissance, this new understanding that through deep neural networks and firing enough of the right data, the models could be basically trained themselves. And that has enabled huge developments in the space of machine vision, particularly now that these systems are now able to run on GPUs on your smartphone, for example, making things so much more responsive and requiring a lot less in terms of server fees, right? Because CUDA instances and stuff in the cloud are pretty expensive. It's much nicer to run those directly on your phone. I think data is definitely an essential aspect in machine intelligence. I think that there are amazing opportunities now for machines to understand more about us than has never been possible before. We have algorithms today which can monitor your heart rate from 50 feet away just by looking at you through a standard camera and doing things like movement magnification to watch blood flowing through your face, and thereby understanding emotion, understanding whenever you feel a twinge of excitement about something, or these tiny expressions that even human beings might not notice, but machines can today. And so machines are developing a very rich picture of who we are, sometimes maybe even finding insights into us that we might not recognize ourselves. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity coming in the next couple of years for machines to give us more self-knowledge and to help us to reach higher forms of human flourishing, to give us gentle coaxes in the right direction, to help us set modest yet achievable goals, which over time will aggregate to make us much happier and healthier people. That's my hope. But I think to enable that, we need to be able to trust machines. I think trust-building technologies such as blockchain are very important. I think blockchain together with machine intelligence is going to be very powerful, because I think that's one of the only ways that we can begin to gain faith that things that are generated by machines, which are very convincing, are believable. And I think the third axis is machine ethics, this idea of teaching machines about human values, how to act in ways which are more preferable to our expectations and how we would like to engage with machines. And so one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, along with some other folks, is a data set for machine ethics to help teach machines a little bit about human beings and how we function and our culture.
Thanks, Nell. And maybe just to stay with you for a second. So in South by Southwest, while I suspect we're a cohort that enjoys dystopian fiction, we probably tend to err on the side of optimistic utopianism. So what are some of the key challenges that maybe we should be taking more proactive thought about from an ethical perspective now?
Well, firstly I'll say that optimism, reasoned or cautious optimism, is a very important thing. Without having some optimism in the future, we cannot reach forward to the future we would like to select and then bring it back into the present. And we have a lot of dystopian memes in our culture. We don't really have the enthusiastic science fiction of the 1950s and 60s these days. And unfortunately, what you put out into the cultural data set, if you will, tends to come back again, right? I liken it to riding a motorcycle on the road and there's an obstacle. And if you look at the obstacle, you'll probably hit it. Rather you need to be looking at where you want to be going, and then you'll naturally go in that direction. And there are some definite obstacles. I think We've seen a social discohesion in our society. Statistically, back in the 1990s or so, there wasn't that much difference between, for example, left politics and right politics, for example. And yet we've seen an increasing polarization. Partly that's due to things like social media and the sort of echo chamber and filter bubble effects. But I think this is now being amplified by machine intelligence to some degree, with bots and things like that, and increasingly counterfeiting of content. And so I think that just as machines are in many ways contributing to this social discohesion, I think that if we're lucky, we can also use machines to help find ways in which we have common ground and to bring us closer together.
Thanks. So Manoj, you mentioned some of the work that you were doing with genomics, and what can you see coming in the future as companies, healthcare providers start to use genomic data more to inform, well, Rory used a good term of augmentation, but in a sense, machines will start to make decisions about individuals' health, individuals' treatment, individuals', I guess, potential likely quality of life or length of life. Where are the risks there, and what can we as technologists do about that?
Right. So, in terms of genomics itself, precision medicine is one big area where genomics is going to affect in a huge way, right? But in terms of risks involved, if machines start interpreting things and there are some false positive, the risk of harm is higher, and that's when one of the values that Microsoft came up with in a book called Future Computed, I would highly recommend you read that, is accountability. Machine accountability is very important, and the people developing these models are also have to be accountable for the lifespan of the model, AI model that they put in. Also, the second pillar is about transparency. The way we are able to explain what the models are doing is very important for us to make sure that they are. It's a way that the machine models could be explained, and once they are being explained, you can go back and understand what really happened if there is something happened. So these are two major pillars that Microsoft thinks that they are important. Other important things are fairness, security and privacy, safety and reliability, and also inclusiveness. They might not be exhaustive set of things that we have to be taken care of in terms of AI ethics, but they give us a framework to work towards, to create a roadmap when we are building machines which are complementing or working alongside humans in improving our work.
That's really interesting, and I guess to stay with that theme for a second, I think everybody's mentioned large volumes of data, increases in CPU power that allows decisions to be made in a split second, but we're long past the days of everything being implemented as a well articulated, understood decision tree in a deep learning type model. I mean, you don't know why an algorithm actually made this particular decision in this particular case, because of the volume of data that it's looking at. How do we provide that level of trust to the patients who may well be receiving a treatment based on a machine learning type decision, or a citizen who may well be applying for, a passport but gets rejected because a machine made a decision somewhere in the back room? How do you actually build that trust?
So that's a really good question. I mean, in the sense that the fact that we are saying that the machine have to be transparent not necessarily means that we will be able to figure out in near world the deep learning things that you're mentioning that will be explainable. The more systematic it is, the less complex ML model are more explainable than deep learning models which are which are really less explainable. If you plot a graph, that's how it is going to be. But then the idea is to make sure that anything and everything you do, there are things that you have to so the models that you create from the base of it, you have to make sure that you understand, you yourself understand what you do. But if there are a lot more data that is available, it is hard to explain. I would like to ask other things, but yeah.
Rory, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's a super hard question.
Deliberately so?
Yeah.
Was my rim shot?
So I think actually to kind of reflect back on what Nell and Manoj have said is that having a kind of set of guiding principles or a framework within which you make decisions about what it is that you're going to build up front helps to mitigate against the results of putting those things in place, right? Because it is incredibly difficult to explain how a machine has arrived at a decision, especially if we're using some of the more advanced techniques for doing that. And we're getting into a world where machines can now synthesize data, never mind act on data that it has been provided with, right? So that becomes even more scary and interesting. In the UK, there's a select committee, so that's kind of basically a body set up within government to try and understand what is going on in a particular field. And there's the Bishop of Oxford is kind of offered a report back to the select committee, which I think is kind of wonderful. Is that as a bishop came up with 10 commandments for AI, which I think is quite cool. But the main focus of those was the idea of making sure that when we're applying these techniques, it is for the benefit of humans. It's to help us get better. It's to help us understand the world more. And I think that's the most important thing, is to not just do things because we can, but to think about why. Fundamental questions that I always ask about anything or any new technology is like, why are we doing this? Like, great, we can build AI, but why? Why have we done this? It's a very difficult one to answer in terms of explaining the answer something came up with, but I think if you're going into these things with your eyes open and understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve up front, you're probably going to have a slightly better outcome, I suppose.
Nell?
It's quite tricky. And not only are explainability issues one of the biggest areas of research in machine intelligence today, but that mandating that something should be explainable is also a security risk, because it means it's an attack vector. Like, if you can figure out how an algorithm works, you can exploit it. That is also a problem. And also, these algorithms are often quite proprietary, and companies spend a great deal of money on them, and they update all the time as well. So the algorithm you used last week might have changed, or how the algorithm functions might be dependent on various different variables, time or data or location, that sort of thing. So it really is a very significant challenge. I think technology might be able to help, but it's probably a few years out. I think something like another kind of strange black box, which uses technologies such as zero-knowledge protocols, might be able to vet whether an algorithm is statistically dangerous in terms of its bias or somewhat aberrant, without necessarily having any knowledge of how the algorithm itself functions. If you're curious about that, you can have a chat with me later.
I think one of the things that Nell mentioned there is quite interesting. And there's two things I'd reflect on here. Is that even though some of the ideas around how artificial intelligence and machine learning might work have been around for a very, very long time, it's the fact that technology has caught up to the point where we're now able to do like basically physical implementations of these experiments and theories that were suggested many, many years ago. We don't know how a lot of this stuff works, and we don't actually know what the impact is going to be on that. And I think one of the responsibilities of people who are involved in this technology is to try and help people understand what it is that we're trying to do with it and why we're trying to do it. I think that's a really, really important thing. And that's why it's really nice to have these kind of conversations and hold our hands up and go, actually, we don't know how to solve some of these problems. We're going to have to figure this out as we're going along. And that can be a little bit scary, I think, sometimes. And it can kind of lean towards the idea of regulation and this, that, and the other, and whether that should be put in place or should there be watchdogs for these kind of things. And they're all conversations that we should be having around this kind of stuff, I think, to figure out how best can we use a technology that we're almost pushing to the point. Well, we have pushed to the point where there are things about it that we don't quite understand how it's making those decisions. So it's it's a very interesting place to be, I think.
Okay. So one of the things on the slide behind me is human impact, and I guess the tip of everybody's tongue is jobs and the future of work. I guess in your respective spheres, I mean, what's your perception of the impact of the growth of artificial intelligence on, in the case of Rory, so at Kainos, both as an employer, but also as a deliverer of services to a government or financial services organisation? What's the impact?
Okay, so I'll start from the question around as a company that has lots of really, really cool people working on things like building software, doing sort of activities that help people understand data, try to make improvements to businesses and stuff like that. There's a real danger that a lot of that kind of work could vanish with the application of AI, right? So that I'm kind of scared, right? I could be automated away. So some of the things that I do are like look at things like software architecture, look at things like the cybersecurity threats that could be applied to software architecture. That can be probably pretty easily kind of automated away with some machine learning techniques, I guess. So there's kind of a responsibility on us as businesses, and maybe we're a little bit unique, but we don't exist just to make money. We exist to have a good place for people to work and to flourish and get better. So there's a responsibility on us to understand that. And then help the people that we work with learn and get better. And I think if you look at it with cautious optimism, like I mentioned earlier on, and I think Nell's mentioned as well, is that we can use these technologies as an accelerator for what we do. And if you bring that into your business, actually you're giving yourself almost a cruel competitive advantage over other people who are not making use of these kind of technologies. So it's both worrying and exciting at the same time. And the same thing can apply then for like some of the organizations and stuff that we work with. They're people-heavy processes doing, like in some cases, uncreative work, filling in forms, writing a thing from one place to another, trying to figure out what this data means. And those jobs, they probably will vanish. Like I don't. There's no way of kind of saying that in a nice way. There's a lot of jobs will vanish that machines can do better, quicker, and with better results than humans can do right now.
Can I just interrupt you there for a second? I mean, is it the jobs that will vanish, or is it particular tasks within jobs?
Well, I think that's a good distinction, right? It is more the tasks that exist within those roles. Now, whether roles are made up entirely of those sort of tasks that can be taken away, or 80% of those roles are that repetitive kind of boring work, and then there's 20% creativity. My view on this is, and my hope is that we push this towards allowing people to do more of the things where humans really should be involved, right? So from a medical point of view, maybe our efforts are better focused on improving processes within hospitals by using AI to schedule people to be in places and make more with less, because we keep getting asked to do that, and it frees people up to do the human things and the stuff that machines really can't do, like be empathic with people and kind of offer them a human version of the results of a machine making some decisions and so on. So it's, again, cautious optimism. It's my take on this stuff is that it's a huge opportunity for us to change the way that we look at how we work and how we interact with each other and stuff like that as well.
Thanks, Rory. Manoj, what about the Microsoft view in the world?
Okay, so before Microsoft view on the world, I mean, in terms of job itself, I read this somewhere, it's not my point of view, but I read this somewhere. When you see jobs are consisting of different kinds of activities, different kind of tasks. There are few tasks which are automatable, there are few tasks which are not automatable. And the density of these kind of tasks which are automatable are more in certain kind of jobs versus less in certain kind of jobs, right? So at that point, what happens is the jobs which are actually more dense in automatable tasks, those are going to be diminished, or the wage difference between the ones that are highly automatable versus low automatable would increase, and that's where the gap is going to be there, and that's an issue right? I mean, the fact that we are all technologists here, we are excited about our future, but there are people outside who do not have this access. They are, they are really scared about what the future is in store. Is the livelihood going to be taken away because machines are coming and then machines are able to do multiple value-added activities before which humans were doing. There is another example where they're saying that farming will not be people who are farming would not be like generally people with fruit pickers in it. It would be more agricultural analyst. Now, if you see that fruit picker versus an agricultural analyst, it's a high value task versus fruit picker, which is getting really automated, right? And that's the scary part, which is really coming up. The other thing about you asked about Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft.
Okay, so Microsoft view on things is we work on three principles, right? The first principle itself is making sure that, as Rory was mentioning, democratizing AI. We want to make sure that all the technologies that are being created that complements human effort. I mean, it's not taking away, maximizing the productivity, but not destroying the labor, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is improving their efficiency. The third thing is AI to be available for all and available for good, and that's when the ethic part comes into picture. So.
And Nell?
I certainly agree that AI can replace tasks, but not jobs. For example, I think that AI can make a great coach, but a lousy mentor. And both aspects of those roles or those tasks are an essential part of teaching, for example. And you can extend that to things like the medical profession as well. There are good sides and bad sides. And the good side, as you say, less fruit pickers, more agricultural analysts, and perhaps that's helping people to use more of their natural capacities, which is great. At the same time, not everyone has those capacities. There are constraints. Some people just don't have the same level of cognitive capability or creativity, and increasingly, that's the way our economy is going. It really requires talent, it requires the ability to focus, it requires long-term engagement and avoiding impulse. And unfortunately, not everyone in our society is good at that. And to some extent, better education can help with that, and better sort of life coaching tools from AI perhaps. But I think, we are seeing a bit of a discohesion in society. Some people do feel left behind, particularly those in rural areas or those outside of the sort of cultural core of society. And I think some of the events in 2016 taught us that there are many people in our society that are hurting, that feel like they don't really have the status that they once did. And they're seeing change in the world, change in their communities, and they don't like it. And they're quite prepared to flip the table or roll the dice and pray for a hard six and just see what happens, because they feel that they have very little to lose. And I think we need to be careful with people that feel that they have very little to lose, and to figure out how to help people to not feel so hurt anymore. I think things like the opioid crisis at the moment is another very telling factor that tells us that our communities are not quite as strong as they used to be. So I think my fear is less from Terminators running rogue and killing us all, but rather machines in some ways creating a more fragmented society, a society built out of enclaves where people may have less connection to each other. I think at the moment, that's probably the direction in which we're heading. I don't think we want to go down that road much more. I think perhaps, like I mentioned, AI, blockchain, and machine ethics together might produce some solutions in the 2020s that help to increase social cohesion and bring us all together.
Okay. So just to follow up on that, Nell, so what do you think we need to do, and this is probably more a society question than anything else, I mean, is it something that the technology companies who seem to have increasing, power and influence, particularly, the big Amazons, Googles, etc., or is it something that the government should be responsible for?
I'm excited by things like the free and open source software movement, because so much of our current infrastructure is built upon that. And we see extensions of that into things like crypto economics today. I think that things like distributed autonomous organizations are very, very interesting and are a hint at what is coming around the corner. This is basically a form of organization or business, you could liken it to, which is in some level automated or controlled by AI. And this organization can in fact hire human beings to go and do work or do tasks for it. But you could have this kind of business that runs in the cloud, which generates profit by trading and redistributes that profit to shareholders, back to human beings that may otherwise not have those resources. And I think that's probably where the economy is going to go over the next 10 years. I think some people are going to end up being employed by machines in robot businesses, perhaps quite happily. And I think this is a sort of free market alternative to the idea of relying upon government to solve the problems.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we're coming towards the end of our time. Is there any questions from the audience, given that we've got such illustrious brains here? Can you shout and bring the mic down if you need to?
Sure, I can shout. First, great panel. This is one of the best ones we've seen. Really, really well done. One of the things that you guys were talking about is, the benefit, the point, benefits to human beings. Have you seen a moment where you've seen somebody's eyes get opened at the promise of this? Because that's part of the explanation. Part of the people think AI, they think robots, they think Terminator, like you said. Do you have any examples of when somebody says, wow, I see the promise of this that I never saw before?
Absolutely, right. So one of the examples I gave earlier on was around the kind of the vehicle testing thing. And I know it seems like a small thing, but for a large government organisation to realise that they could use these tools to help improve road safety, and that's what they really, really cared about, they were blown away by this. They could not believe what they could do. I've got other examples as well where we've kind of done very similar things, where we've helped use some of the, and again it comes back to the democratisation of these tools, right? So Google and Microsoft and Amazon, IBM, making these tools like freely available in some cases. You can try this stuff for free to try and do things. We've been able to demonstrate to organisations like the Land Registry in the UK, we've shown them that by using advanced kind of image processing techniques, using machine learning, we can help them accelerate digitisation of all of the land in the UK. Like they can accelerate that, and they can spend more time doing the higher value tasks than they would have spent trying to like figure out pen to paper, redraw a thing in a GIS system type thing. And again, that's mind blowing for them. Like it's a small thing, but it's such a huge shift that when people see it, like there's an idea that we kind of we've learned from working in digital services is that the most powerful way of helping people understand something is to show the thing, right? So when you do that, and it goes from AI that's like magic and like weird kind of science maths junk, we don't get it, to showing the thing in action, people just go, wow, what else can we do with this?
Okay, before you go, Rory, so that point about land registry sounds interesting in that, you're not using a machine necessarily to take away anybody's job, because there's no way you'd actually put 1,000 people to manually digitize all that record. This is a new value being created through the use of AI.
Exactly that, and it means that in helping them develop these kind of tools, it means that they can kind of go, oh wow, that's one less horrible thing that we have to deal with on our journey to transform how this is going to work for all of the UK. So it removes barriers and blockers for the higher level progress that these people are trying to achieve, which is, it's amazing. Like, it really is cool when you can see that kind of stuff happening. So yeah.
one of the examples that I can give that my team just finished on is in a healthcare setup, predicting the likelihood of a knee replacement success without even doing knee replacement. So that's going to be, if the likelihood is not very high, why go for knee replacement? There are alternative ways of treating that. So that was really good, and there are certain such use cases in healthcare that are popping up, which are really fascinating.
For me, one of the most profound developments is in unlocking human creativity. Machines are now able to take a simple sketch, like you might draw on the back of a cigarette packet or a napkin or something, and turn that into an object, or provide an augmented reality layer that turns a simple sketch into a painting, for example. And then you can manipulate it in real time and move things around. And I think all of us are incredibly creative, but many times we think we aren't because we just don't have the physical skill to manipulate a paintbrush, for example. And just as Leonardo da Vinci had lots of assistants to help implement his amazing ideas, I think AI is going to help us with that, and we may see an explosion in human creativity over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Nell.
So I want to be optimistic about AI, just like I want to be optimistic about any new technology that comes out. So maybe you can help me here, because there are a lot of things that make it difficult for me to be optimistic about AI. So one of them is that it seems to me that with every increase in efficiency in society, so take the Industrial Revolution, for example, you have a general increase in the well-being of a lot of society, but you also have a massive increase in the economic inequality. So with AI being something that is orders of magnitude larger in the increase in efficiency as compared to something like the Industrial Revolution, give me some hope that we're not going to see orders of magnitude larger increases in economic inequality as a result of that.
That's an awesome point, and I think the way I would reflect on that is that for me personally, like beyond the application of technology, I think it's my responsibility to have these kind of discussions and talk about the things that are beyond just how do we use this tech to be more awesome at doing automated trading, because I think personally I think that sucks. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in how we can use this to help people. So the really important thing is that it's on all of us to have these sort of conversations, and when we start to understand what these things are, to have those conversations again with other people around us and try to it's the education side of things, to educate people to what it is that you can do with these things. And the interesting thing about this as well is that we've seen this technology being used in like kind of evil ways to influence elections and stuff recently. Like that's a thing, right? People have been building bots and like basically feeding poison into our social networks and stuff. But those exact same tools are available to all of us to do good with them as well. So for every measure, there's a countermeasure that's now available, and it follows up what Nell mentioned about the kind of free and open source software movement. It is available for us to make use of. The equality thing, that's a much broader question, but I think that's a conversation that goes beyond just technology. That's a conversation about how we engage with politics and get involved in our society, right? So it's one thing to have concerns about this stuff. It's a very different thing to become active and engage in politics to make that difference. And that's the most important thing that we can do, is to stop, I don't know, for me anyway, to stop being binary about whether we go left, right, in between, and to maybe reset what our idea is in terms of politics and society at large, right? And that's the more useful way, I think, that we can try and fix those kind of problems. But yeah.
Thanks, Rory. We've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to just hop from people to people and take one answer.
Thank you all very much. This has been a great talk. So it's kind of piggybacking off his question, and you guys have all touched on it. So how do you all envision ensuring transparency and trustworthiness of machine ethics and the decisions without giving away proprietary information and things like that, so that the public who feels fractured and divided can trust and rely on these decisions of the information that's being gathered and distributed and put in front of them? How are you envisioning that going forward, that's a super important part of this technology moving forward, that the public, as a person, you have to be able to trust what you're seeing. So.
Absolutely, fantastic question. I think people need to be able to feel that they have some way of influencing these kinds of decisions. I think there's a lot of angst in society about decisions being made by some sort of faceless organization or faceless bureaucrat, and increasingly a faceless algorithm. Sometimes when a decision is made by a person, we might feel aggrieved by that person, but sometimes when it's made by an organization, we sort of acquiesce to it. But I think these kinds of decisions need to be participatory. We need to invite people to participate from many different cultures all across society. And we need to be very explicit that we want people's participation in this, to sort of map the current space of ethics at the moment, to figure out people's individual ethical stances, give them some respect for having that stance, but help them to, wherever they happen to be on the moral landscape, to sort of look for the most uphill spot in their zone and help them to work towards it. So, I think that is one way of getting wherever you happen to be on the ethical map, of helping people to reach higher states of human flourishing.
Thanks, Nell.
If I just a quick addition to the points there as well. Part of that depends on the context, right? So if we are using basically automated algorithms and stuff to make decisions from a consumer business relationship point of view, we have choice to not use those services. When it comes to government making these kind of decisions and so on, for me the key element to that is transparency and making the data open and available, so that citizens, like I mentioned before, like the idea that these tools are available, by publishing these data sets and making them available, we can make our own inferences around that kind of data. So there's, in the UK certainly, there's a big movement and basically a statement from government is that by default your data should be made open so people can see and measure how this stuff has been doing, and that's massively important for me.
Good, thank you. One more question?
I actually work for IBM's Watson Technologies, and one of the things we constantly balance is, and you've talked about free and open source software a lot, but how do you balance that with the need to monetize this software in order to continue to advance? I mean, it's not going to advance unless there's money to spend on it, money thrown into it, so can you touch on that?
Manoj,
I think maybe the mic wasn't working as well as could. So we mentioned free and open source software, and the question is, how do you balance making things available and open versus keeping things closed and being able to get basically competitive advantage from building these systems and so on, right? So I don't know, maybe you've a take on that one.
I think there are many different degrees between fully proprietary and fully open. We see many different models whereby companies that exist for a purely profit motive give away a lot of software or open up a lot of software. So I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. And certainly we still have a lot of proprietary server technology and things like that in our internet infrastructure. So there's room for things to be very compatible, I believe, between those two.
So I guess on that one, for me, sometimes that comes down actually to your people advantage. So yes, you make some of your stuff open, and there's the kind of approach of you keep the latest versions of things to yourself to keep that competitive advantage, yet you're making it enough, because this is about building ecosystems around your product. Like if you make these things open, it means that more people can come and make use of your products and apply your technology, and that helps you as an organization to kind of basically to build trust and to give something back to community. There's all these benefits to contributing to open source software, but I completely get where you're coming from, is that maybe you're eroding your competitive advantage, but that comes down to the people that you have who are creative enough to come up with these things in the first place. That's your biggest advantage, I think.
Okay, so this is fabulous discussion. I'd love to go on forever, but I'm probably going to be kicked off stage shortly. I guess just one final question from me, and it follows on from, I guess, the point that we were making. So, if we've got people in the room who are intrigued or inspired, how can they start getting involved in AI, either from development perspective or from, a philosophy, understanding the potential, understanding the risks? Are there any pointers or resources they should look at?
There's a ton of stuff out there, so you could literally go play right now with stuff and play around with image processing techniques or whatever. Fastly.ai is worth checking out. They have kind of an online course that can teach you, like it takes you from zero to kind of trying to build neural networks and stuff over the course of 7 weeks. It's free, open, it's great, so that's a good starting point.
So in terms of ethics, there are quite a few groups which are working on ethics, like Partnership on AI, and there's an Ether committee. Not sure if it is external or internal to Microsoft, but then there are lots of other companies which are coming up together to create these kind of forums where lots of these ethical questions are being answered, talked about. Even the government is part of that. So that's one thing. And in terms of technology, there are lots of courses that Microsoft has come up with. It's called Microsoft Professional Program for Big Data, Advanced Analytics, Artificial Intelligence has come up. So these are some of the things that could be touched upon when it comes to technology.
Okay, thanks.
I think if you're curious about the state of play and how things are changing, I can recommend a newsletter, Azim Azar's Exponential View. It's pretty good. It gives you a nice picture of what's going on today and what's coming out in the near future. If you're interested in neural networks, there is, I think it's play.tensorflow.org. You can experiment live in your web browser with different neural network configurations. And I also have a course on convolutional neural networks as well, if you get curious about that aspect as well.
That's great, thank you very much. I will just do one final slightly flippant question, yes, no answer. Elon Musk was in town yesterday. Are we summoning the demon?
No.
Are we summoning the demon?